The studio lights gleamed warmly over rows of eager faces. From the moment Ellen Dawson stepped onto the set, she commanded attention. She wore a bright dress that matched her bubbly smile, and she moved with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years entertaining millions. Around her, the crew scurried like busy bees, adjusting cameras and touching up makeup, all working together to make the show run like clockwork. The audience, a lively mix of students, parents, and retirees, buzzed with anticipation. They had come for Ellen's trademark blend of humor and heart, expecting jokes, surprise guests, and perhaps even a dance break or two. Backstage, John Kennedy took a deep breath before stepping into the spotlight. He wore a simple suit, dark but not flashy, and a small cross pendant hung from his neck. John carried no microphone. Instead, he had a soft, steady voice that needed no gadget to be heard. He was not a celebrity in the usual sense. Rather, he was a community leader and pastor who had spent the last decade serving a neighborhood church in a city far from Hollywood's glitz. His hair was peppered with gray and fine lines framed his gentle eyes, a map of kindness and quiet strength. John's journey had not been easy. He grew up in a modest home where money was always tight, and the world seemed to demand toughness just to get by. Yet, even as a boy, he felt drawn to help others. On weekends, he volunteered at a food pantry, packing bags of groceries for families who could not afford much. He listened when people spoke of their troubles, offering comfort and hope. Over time, his small acts of kindness grew into something larger. He helped raise funds for a community garden, started a tutoring program for children who struggled in school, and organized free medical checkups in a makeshift clinic. His faith guided him, but it was his love for people that fueled his work. When Ellen's team invited John to appear on the show, they had not expected him to be anything more than a mild-mannered guest. They imagined a brief segment in which he would talk about his charity's latest project, maybe unveil a heartwarming success story, and then move on. But in the days before the show, staff members began to notice something different. John's interviews with producers revealed a man of deep conviction. He spoke gently but firmly about why he believed, why he felt drawn to serve. He told them about the single mother whose tears had broken his heart when she said she could not feed her children, and about the elderly man who had found new purpose after tending the community garden. These stories stirred something in the team, a respect they had not expected. On the morning of the taping, tension and excitement mingled in the air. Ellen chatted with her assistant as she walked across the stage, her heels echoing softly on the polished floor. She glanced toward the guest entrance, aware that John would appear any moment. Her face showed curiosity, but also a hint of mischief, a sign that she planned to test him with her quick wit. That was Ellen's style. She had built her career on smart commentary and surprise questions, always keeping guests and the audience on their toes. John emerged from behind the curtain, and the audience broke into warm applause. He offered a humble wave and settled into the guest chair across from Ellen. The chairs were set close together, creating an almost intimate space. The background was bright and colorful, with the show's logo lit up like neon art. Cameras rolled, capturing every expression. Ellen's animated gestures, John's calm nods. The stage lights felt hot, but John sat with his hands lightly folded, his posture relaxed yet upright. Ellen began with her usual flair. She asked about John's faith, weaving her questions with humor. "So, Pastor Kennedy," she said, leaning forward, "you spend your Sundays preaching to the choir, but what do you do the rest of the week? Save kittens from trees?" The audience laughed, and John smiled politely. He replied, "Well, Ellen, while I appreciate a good kitten rescue, most of my week is spent working with families in need. We try to offer more than food. We offer hope." As the conversation continued, Ellen kept up her playful banter. She teased him about wearing a suit every day, asked if he had any secret hobbies like skydiving or stand-up comedy, and even joked about whether his charity ever ran out of coffee. John answered each question with the same gentle tone, his eyes shining with sincerity. He spoke of long days spent organizing volunteers, of late nights planning community events, and of the quiet satisfaction that came with seeing a family's life improve just a little bit. The audience watched, captivated. They had come expecting a light segment, but John's gentle honesty added a depth they hadn't seen on Ellen's stage before. His stories felt real, grounded in everyday struggles and small victories. When he spoke of the children he tutored or the neighbors who came together to plant vegetables in an empty lot, the room seemed to lean in, hungry for his words, and just as the mood settled into warmth, Ellen decided to raise the stakes. With a mischievous glint in her eye, she asked, "Don't you ever feel that faith like yours is a bit outdated? I mean, we live in a fast-paced world of apps and social media. How does praying in church keep up with a society where people want answers in an instant?" The laughter that followed was tense, as though everyone knew a line was being crossed. John paused, his smile fading for just a moment. He looked around the studio, seeing faces that ranged from amusement to discomfort. The cameras captured it all. John took a breath. He knew this question was loaded. He had encountered skepticism before, neighbors who thought his faith was quaint, colleagues who said charity could be more efficient with a business mindset. Yet he had never faced someone as bold as Ellen, right there in front of millions of viewers. The studio lights seemed brighter now, almost harsh. The hum of the teleprompter blended with the soft rustle of audience members shifting in their seats. Ellen pressed on, sensing the shift. "Come on, Pastor. Don't you think it's time faith got with the program? How many prayers does it take to fix a broken streetlight or help someone find a job?" She laughed, the sound echoing in the air while the audience chuckled in response. But somewhere in that laughter lay a question, a challenge to what John represented. At that moment, John's calm returned. He straightened a bit in his chair, looked directly at Ellen, and began to speak. His voice was quiet but carried across the studio with clarity. He thanked her for the question, then told a story, not a grand sermon, but a small, true-life moment. He spoke of a teenager who had been absent from school, not because of laziness, but because her mother had lost her job and their rent was overdue. This teen had felt abandoned, invisible. John's faith had called him to intervene. He described how he and his volunteers raised money for that month's rent, how they sat beside the family's kitchen table and listened to their fears. He shared how the young girl came back to class, head held higher, because someone had cared enough to act, to pray, and then to work. The studio grew still. Ellen's playful smile faded into something softer, more reflective. The audience, too, hushed. Cameras turned from capturing jokes to capturing genuine emotion. John didn't demand applause or thanks. He simply told the truth of what faith had inspired him to do. In those moments, the playful set of a daytime show felt more like a gathering of people searching for real meaning. As John spoke, the tension in the room changed from uneasy to hopeful. He wasn't arguing or mocking. He was sharing a small truth about kindness and belief. When he finished, a gentle silence fell. Ellen opened her mouth, as if to say something, then closed it, her eyes fixed on John. The crew paused, unsure how to proceed. The teleprompter continued, but its words felt empty now. In that brief pause, something remarkable happened. The audience began to clap, slowly at first, then more deeply. Not a polite, routine clap, but one filled with warmth and respect. Ellen, for the first time that day, was silent. John simply nodded, humble and grateful. The cameras glided past, capturing the moment of connection. Behind the scenes, producers whispered in astonishment. They had booked a light-hearted interview but ended up with something far richer, a genuine exchange that revealed the power of simple truths. For Ellen Dawson, it was a lesson in humility. For John Kennedy, it was a chance to show that faith, quiet, steadfast, and compassionate, could touch hearts in a world that often seemed too busy to listen. The segment ended, but its impact lingered. As the audience rose to give a standing ovation, the studio felt changed, as if it had witnessed something rare and true, and in that glow of shared understanding, the stage lights shone not just on two individuals, but on the possibility that even in a world of quick jokes and faster media, kindness and faith could still speak louder than any punchline. The studio lights flickered to life once more, and the familiar hum of cameras and cables filled the air. Ellen Dawson sat poised in her chair, legs crossed, flashing a wide grin at the audience. John Kennedy leaned forward just slightly, hands resting on his knees, ready to speak. The chatter of the crowd dimmed as the director called for quiet, and the red on-air light glowed steadily above the set. In that moment, the playful energy of the show was as bright as the spotlights overhead. Ellen began with an easy laugh and a warm tone that put most guests at ease. "John, your story has already touched so many," she said, gesturing toward the camera. "People are saying your charity work changed their lives. Tell us, what inspired you to start helping others in the first place?" The question was gentle, the kind of opener that invited reflection. John smiled softly, took a breath, and began to speak of childhood Sundays in his grandmother's kitchen, where a simple loaf of bread could feed an entire family. He described how those meals planted a seed of compassion in him, how he watched his elders slice bread and pass plates, with a quiet dignity that spoke louder than any speech. As John shared these memories, Ellen leaned in, nodding as if she too could smell the scent of fresh bread and hear the laughter of families gathered around the table. The cameras panned across the audience. Their faces were attentive, some nodding, some leaning forward as if they too remembered the smell of home-cooked meals and the comfort of community. John spoke of the day he realized his faith was not just a matter of words in a book, but a call to action, a light shining in dark corners where people struggled in silence. When John finished, Ellen clapped lightly. "That's beautiful," she said. "You've turned those memories into real change for so many families." The audience responded with warm applause. For a moment, the mood was gentle and heartfelt, the kind of pause you might find in a garden between two storms. Ellen let that moment hang, letting the applause die down before she shifted gears. With a spark in her eye, she tumbled the conversation toward humor. "Now, John," she said, raising an eyebrow, "all that talk of bread and kindness sounds great, but let's get real. Have you ever considered a more exciting hobby? I mean, people collect stamps, some even brew their own beer. Do you ever get bored of talking about faith and feeding people?" Her tone was light, teasing. The audience chuckled at the imagined scene of a pastor juggling loaves of bread and church bulletins while trying to brew craft ale. John laughed, the sound gentle and genuine. "I've tried a few hobbies," he admitted. "I once attempted woodworking, but my birdhouse ended up more abstract art than shelter. And I might bake the occasional loaf for friends, but there's only so much bread one neighborhood can eat." The audience laughed again, and Ellen smiled, clearly pleased with the friendly rapport. She pressed on, enjoying the playful back and forth. "Well, I'm surprised you haven't taken up skydiving or deep-sea diving," she teased, leaning closer. "Maybe you could save people from danger instead of just feeding them." A ripple of laughter ran through the studio. John's eyes twinkled as he shook his head. "I prefer my feet on solid ground," he said, "though I suppose saving someone from despair can feel as dramatic as any rescue." His answer grounded the joke in something deeper, and the audience's laughter softened into thoughtful nods. Ellen paused as if considering which direction to take next. Her reputation was built on sharp wit, on the ability to make guests and viewers laugh at unexpected turns. She glanced at the teleprompter, then back at John, and decided to push the envelope a bit further. "Pastor Kennedy," she said, adopting a mock-serious tone, "with all due respect, don't you think faith like yours is a little out of style? I mean, we live in a world of instant gratification. People want answers fast. How does praying in church keep up when you can get news updates in seconds and order a meal with the tap of a finger?" A hush settled over the audience. The laughter that had bubbled just moments before felt suddenly shaky. Some people shifted in their seats, glancing around as if unsure what to do next. The crew froze. The camera operators held their breath over their viewfinders. John's smile faded, replaced by a thoughtful crease between his brows. He looked at Ellen, then out at the crowd as if gauging their readiness for such a loaded question. Ellen leaned back, folding her arms with a self-satisfied smirk. She had expected a bit of surprise, maybe a quick retort. Instead, she found herself facing something more complex, genuine unease. The audience's laughter stopped altogether, replaced by a low murmur. Even the show's band, poised to play a humorous sting, kept their instruments still. John took a moment, a breath so quiet you could almost see it before he began to speak. His voice was calm, carrying a weight that cut through the tension. "I understand why you'd ask that," he said, looking directly into the camera as if speaking to every viewer at home. "In a fast-paced world, faith might seem slow, even old-fashioned. But for me, faith isn't about speed. It's about presence." He paused, letting the words settle. When you pray, or when you sit with someone who is hurting, time slows down. You give someone your full attention. You remind them they're not alone. In that space, there can be healing that no instant solution can match. The audience leaned forward again, drawn by the sincerity of his words. Ellen's smirk softened into a curious tilt of her head. John continued, telling another brief story. A young mother who had lost her home, who cried in the pouring rain because her world seemed to be falling apart. He described how, through his church, he and a team of volunteers built her a simple shelter, not just of wood and nails, but of friendship and prayer. He spoke of how, in the quiet nights afterward, that mother found the courage to rebuild her life step by step. By the time he finished, the studio felt charged with a different energy, one of quiet reflection rather than lighthearted fun. The microphones captured every word, and the cameras lingered on the faces in the audience, some with tears glistening, others with eyes bright with understanding. Ellen sat motionless, her usual quick wit replaced by a thoughtful expression. The director left the mics open, allowing the silence to grow thick with meaning. When a soft round of applause finally began, it was slow and gentle, building into a heartfelt ovation. Ellen reached for her water glass, sipping as if collecting her thoughts. Then she set the glass down and turned fully toward John, her posture open and attentive. "John," she said, her voice quieter than before, "thank you for that. I hadn't seen it that way." The simplicity of her words carried more weight than any joke. The crew exhaled collectively. The cameras rolled on, capturing every moment of this unexpected turn. Ellen shifted gears once more, but this time her tone was different, softer, more respectful. She asked John how viewers at home could get involved, wondering aloud whether a city full of volunteers might make a bigger impact than a single charity. John's face brightened, and he spoke with quiet enthusiasm about upcoming projects, inviting anyone moved by his story to lend a hand. As the segment wound down, the audience cheered not out of politeness, but from genuine appreciation. Ellen offered a final word of thanks, and the on-air light blinked off. The crew began resetting for the next segment, but the energy in the studio had shifted. What began as a typical jovial interview had become something richer, a shared moment of honesty and heart. Backstage, Ellen's producers congratulated her. "That was gold," one whispered, but Ellen only nodded, her mind racing. She had set out to score laughs and ended up learning a lesson in humility. John slipped quietly into the wings, offering a small wave to Ellen. Her response was a genuine smile, different from the practiced ones she usually gave. It spoke of respect earned and of a connection made in the most unexpected way. When the credits rolled on that day's recording, the clip of Ellen's pointed question and John's heartfelt reply was already making its way around social media. Viewers at home debated, discussed, and shared. Some praised Ellen's willingness to admit she'd been wrong. Others celebrated John's calm strength. In living rooms across the country, families gathered around their screens talking about what faith meant to them and whether small acts of kindness could truly change a life. In the weeks that followed, Ellen and John's on-air exchange became more than just television. It inspired local drive efforts, prayer circles, and community meetings. People who had never stepped inside a church signed up to volunteer at food banks. Coffee shops hosted fundraisers. Neighborhood groups formed around the idea that presence and listening could be just as powerful as action. And for Ellen Dawson, the experience left an indelible mark. In the days after the show, she found herself slowing down, taking the time to talk one-on-one with her guests, asking questions not to surprise but to understand. she discovered that her platform could do more than entertain. It could bring people together, spark real conversation, and encourage viewers to look beyond the screen toward the lives unfolding around them. The cameras captured the laughter, the jokes, the bright lights, but it was the quiet moments of tension and truth that resonated most. In a world that often moves too fast, Ellen had reminded herself and her audience that sometimes the most powerful stories unfold when we pause, listen, and let our hearts speak. The cameras clicked off, and in an instant, the bright set of the talk show transformed into a hive of activity. Crew members hurried to wrap cables, adjust lights, and reset cameras for the next segment. Ellen Dawson sat alone for a moment under the lingering glare of a spotlight, staring at her script as if she were seeing it for the first time. The laughter track from her joke had already been replaced by silence in her mind, an echo of John Kennedy's calm, steady words. She held her cue cards loosely, her usual confident posture softened by a sudden quiet in her chest. Producers gathered around her, voices low but urgent. That moment with John was incredible, one said, eyes shining. Another shook his head in disbelief. We didn't see that coming. Ratings are going to explode. They spoke of social media, mentions, trending topics, all the metrics that measured success on and off the air. But Ellen, listening, felt a different impulse, a twitch of regret mixed with curiosity. She wondered if she had leaned too heavily into a challenge that became something far bigger than a clever punchline. Meanwhile, John Kennedy moved down the narrow hallway toward his dressing room. He passed walls lined with posters of past guests, singers, actors, comedians, all smiling in cheerful poses. He felt a strange contrast between their polished publicity and his own raw honesty. Opening the door, he stepped inside and took a slow, steady breath. The sound of muffled voices and camera motors faded behind him. Here, the air felt cooler, calmer. He walked to a small table where a glass of water waited. He sipped it, tasting the faint chill, and then let his gaze settle on himself in the mirror. John's reflection seemed both familiar and new. He noticed lines around his eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and he recalled the weight he felt when Ellen's laughter followed her pointed question. He had faced skepticism his whole life, neighbors who whispered that faith was out of date, volunteers who gave quietly because that was easier than speaking out. But this time, under the bright lights and before millions of viewers, he had chosen to speak up. His heart still raced with a mix of relief and wonder. What would people think? Would they understand his words or would they twist them? Back on the set, the director called for a quick break before the next guest. The audience shuffled, stretching their legs and whispering to one another. Some looked excited, chatting about John's story. Others seemed pensive, as if replaying his words in their minds. A murmur spread through the seats. Did you hear him? His story about the young mother? I never thought of faith that way. The buzz wasn't about Ellen's joke, but about John's answer. Producers watched the audience's faces on monitors, exchanging looks of disbelief and pride. They had captured something rare, a moment that felt genuine in a world built on scripts. Ellen slipped off her high heels and leaned against the back of her chair, the hard metal cold against her palms. She reached into her bag and pulled out her phone, scrolling through notifications. The number of new messages, tweets, and comments seemed impossible. Her eyes skimmed headlines. Talk show host humbled on live TV. Pastor's grace wins over Ellen. A lesson in listening. She felt a pull in her chest, a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. Embarrassment that she had, in a way, set John up for that challenge. Gratitude that he had shown her and the world something deeper. She tapped a reply to a producer's text. Can we talk about editing that moment out? Then she hesitated, deleting the message. No. That would erase what had happened. And maybe it was something worth keeping. In the dressing room next door, John knelt beside a small wooden chair, closed his eyes and whispered a prayer. Not a long prayer, but one born of gratitude and humility. He thanked God for the courage to speak, for the kindness of strangers who believed, and for the chance to share more than simple stories. He also prayed for Ellen, asking that she find peace in whatever choices she made next. When he rose, his shoulders felt lighter, as if a weight had lifted. He straightened his tie, smoothed his suit jacket, and positioned himself to re-enter the stage, though he did not know if he would be called back. The producers huddled in a corner of the studio, debating whether to invite John in for a follow-up segment. Some worried the mood had shifted too far from light entertainment. Others argued that tearing away from that moment would feel dishonest. People connected, one said. They want more of that. The decision came down simply. They would bring John back after the next break, giving him a chance to share practical ways for viewers to help. The room relaxed, tension replaced by determination to extend something meaningful to the audience. Ellen's assistant tapped her shoulder, whispering about the upcoming segment. Ellen nodded and set her phone aside. When the director signaled her, she stood, smoothing her dress and pulling her hair back slightly. She walked toward the center of the stage, each step measured. The bright lights greeted her, the cameras zoomed in, and the audience settled into quiet anticipation. She offered a small, genuine smile to John as he re-entered. She had learned something about the power of sincerity, and that knowledge quietly shaped her every movement. On air again, Ellen greeted the viewers with practiced cheer. "We'll be right back with Pastor John Kennedy," she said, and then turned to him with a softer tone. "John, we'd love to hear more about how people at home can get involved. You mentioned food drives and community gardens. What can we do if we're inspired by your story?" It was a simple invitation, but it felt heartfelt. John's eyes met hers, and he saw respect there, a willingness to listen. He nodded and spoke of basic steps. Donate canned goods, volunteer an hour at a local shelter, start a small prayer, group to support neighbors in need. As he spoke, Ellen sat back and listened, sometimes jotting a note on a small pad. The audience, too, leaned in, as if they were once more drawn into a genuine conversation rather than staged segments. The studio's energy felt warm, collaborative. No longer was Ellen the cheeky host poking fun. She was a partner in sharing practical hope. When John suggested a community walk that weekend to raise both funds and awareness, Ellen even offered to join him, on camera or off, to show solidarity. After the show ended, Ellen found John backstage. The bright chaos of crew packing up surrounded them, but they stood in a small pocket of calm. "Thank you," Ellen said quietly, meeting his gaze, "for showing me and everyone another way to see faith." John offered a gentle smile. "And thank you, Ellen, for letting me speak." They shook hands, then embraced briefly. It was a gesture of mutual respect, born of that shared, unplanned moment on air. Walking off the studio floor, John felt a new sense of purpose. He greeted a few young volunteers waiting with flyers in their hands. They beamed at him, telling him how they planned to start a neighborhood cleanup next week. He answered their questions, offered encouragement, and even jotted down a few ideas for making the event more inclusive. In that hallway, far from the bright lights, the real work of kindness continued, fed by the spark of shared humanity they had ignited on live television. Ellen returned to her dressing room, where she sat at her vanity mirror and studied her reflection. She barely recognized the woman who had walked in hours earlier, so confident, so sure that quick humor was all she needed. Now she saw someone more thoughtful, aware that each joke carried weight and every question could open a door or close one. She promised herself to carry that lesson forward, to ask questions that informed and connected rather than just entertained. Later that night, as John drove home in his simple car, the city lights flickered past his window. He thought of the families waiting for him at the community center, the single mother who needed help, the teenager who needed tutoring, the elderly couple who just wanted a friendly chat. He realized that the spotlight of television was fleeting, but the spotlight of everyday life, where people met one another on porches, around dining tables, in church basements, was where lasting change happened. He pulled into the parking lot of his church and smiled. Inside, a small group gathered to plan a food drive for the weekend. They handed him flyers, asked for blessing over their efforts, and shared laughter as they organized boxes of canned goods. John felt the warmth of community, the same warmth he had seen shine in the studio that afternoon. He offered a brief prayer of gratitude asked for strength and reminded everyone that kindness was a gift they gave themselves as much as others. The real work lay before them, in conversations, in simple acts, in the quiet moments of faith put into action. And so, behind the scenes of a show designed for laughter and light, two very different people found common ground. Ellen Dawson, the host whose jokes had once fallen flat, learned the power of listening. John Kennedy, the pastor whose faith had been questioned, discovered the reach of a single moment of courage. Together they sparked conversations that would ripple through living rooms, coffee shops, and church halls alike. In the hush after the cameras, and in the gentle buzz of plans being made, the story continued, one small act of kindness at a time. The stage lights dimmed briefly before brightening again, signaling a change in mood. The audience settled back into their seats, a soft murmur rippling through the rows. Ellen Dawson adjusted her posture, smoothing the fabric of her dress, and glanced at the cameras. She seemed ready to move on, but then the director's voice crackled over the headset. "Bring John back out." A ripple of excitement passed through the crew. This was the moment they had all been waiting for. John Kennedy took a steadying breath backstage, his heart thumping with a mix of nerves and resolve. And then he stepped into the glowing circle of light once more. He paused at the edge of the stage, giving a brief nod to Ellen. She offered, a small encouraging smile as if to say, "This is your moment." The audience, still buzzing from the earlier exchange, fell into a respectful hush. John crossed the stage with measured steps and took the chair opposite Ellen. As he settled in, the bright lights felt warmer than before. The set felt less like a studio and more like a living room filled with friends leaning in to hear a story. Without any preamble, John looked at Ellen and then out at the audience. "Thank you for inviting me back," he began, his voice calm and clear. "I want to share something simple tonight, a way for all of us to bring light into the lives of those around us." He leaned forward slightly, hands open on his lap. "You don't need fame or fortune. You don't need to speak on national television. You just need willingness and a kind heart." Ellen nodded, and the cameras closed in for a tighter shot on John's face. His eyes were gentle but focused, and his expression showed both humility and conviction. "If you've ever felt alone, or if you've ever wondered whether one person can truly make a difference, let me tell you about a woman named Maria." He paused, letting the audience imagine her before he continued. Maria was a single mother working 2 jobs to support her children. She barely had time to sleep, let alone dream. One day her youngest daughter fell ill, and they couldn't afford the medicine she needed. A hush fell over the studio. Viewers leaned forward. John described how his charity team had learned of Maria's struggle through a neighbor's call. Without hesitation, they gathered enough funds to pay for the medicine. But they did more than that. They delivered a basket of groceries, along with a handwritten note that read, "You are not alone." He spoke of the look on Maria's face when she opened the door, tears shining in her eyes, not only from relief but from the simple knowledge that someone cared. Ellen's eyes softened. The audience felt the weight of John's words. He continued, "That note wasn't written by a celebrity or a politician. It was written by someone just like you and me. Someone who took 2 minutes to write a few lines from the heart." His voice grew warmer, carrying a quiet urgency. "Imagine what would happen if each person here took 2 minutes to reach out, by phone, by text, or by a simple note, to someone they knew was struggling. Think of the ripples that single act of kindness could create." The studio lights seemed to fade around them, leaving only John's voice and the audience's shared breath. Ellen remained silent, fully present. John went on to describe another example, a group of teenagers who volunteered to teach reading at the community center. They started small, just an hour a week after school, but their dedication drew more volunteers, and soon the center offered homework help, art classes, and even weekend sports activities. He emphasized that this growth happened because one person invited a friend, and that friend invited another. As John spoke, he glanced at Ellen once or twice, as if to include her in the story. When he mentioned inviting friends, he added, "Ellen, You could start your own kindness chain right here." The audience laughed softly and Ellen smiled, her eyes bright with unexpected enthusiasm. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees. For a moment, she looked less like the polished host and more like someone ready to roll up her sleeves. John wrapped up his stories by saying, "Kindness doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be real." He paused, looking out at the viewers at home. If you feel too small to make a difference, remember that small things, when done by many people, become something big. The silence that followed was warm and expectant, as though the audience was holding its breath to see what would happen next. Then one person in the front row stood up, applause breaking the quiet. Slowly, others rose until the entire audience was on its feet, clapping and cheering. It wasn't polite applause, it was heartfelt, a bridge between strangers united by John's message. Ellen joined in, her applause genuine and enthusiastic, her earlier mischief replaced by admiration. The standing ovation continued, filling the studio with a tangible sense of hope. When the applause finally subsided, Ellen stood and offered her hand to John. She said, her voice carrying warmth rather than usual banter, "John, that was incredible. You've shown us how faith and kindness can light up even the darkest places." The cameras captured her words, but they felt unscripted, born of genuine respect. John took her hand, gave a small nod, and replied, "Thank you, Ellen, for giving me this chance. Now it's up to all of us to keep the light shining." The director cut to a commercial break, but the audience's energy did not wane. People talked excitedly among themselves. Producers whispered over monitors about how this segment would become a defining moment in the show's history. Ellen stepped aside, removing her headset and breathing deeply as she prepared for the next part of the program. John, meanwhile, walked slowly toward the exit, shaking hands and offering quiet words of encouragement to crew members and volunteers waiting near the wings. Backstage, Ellen's producer placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You did good," he said softly. Ellen offered a small smile, the kind that comes from a lesson learned. She whispered, "No, John did good. I'm just glad I listened." The producer nodded, and Ellen turned to the monitor to watch the crowd's reaction on television screens. John sat alone in a quiet corner of the green room, reflecting on the whirlwind of the last hour. He felt gratitude for the opportunity and a renewed sense of purpose. He thought of Maria and the teenagers, of every person whose life was touched by a note, a meal, or a listening ear. He pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket and jotted down ideas for new projects. A weekend workshop on writing notes, of encouragement, a community mural painted with words of hope. He smiled, knowing that these ideas could spread the way kindness itself spreads, one person at a time. When the show ended for the day, Ellen approached John with a small gift. "A stack of blank cards and colorful pens. For your notes," she said, laughing softly. He accepted them, touched by the thought. "Thank you, Ellen," he replied. "I'll write the first one to you." And so, in that backstage alley filled with cables and coffee cups, two people, from very different worlds, shared a simple moment of connection, not scripted, not forced, but genuine. By the next morning, clips of John's response had gone viral online. Social media feeds were filled with people sharing stories of small acts of kindness they planned to carry out. Local news stations picked up the story, and community centers reported record numbers of new volunteers. Ellen's talk show saw a ratings boost, but more importantly, it saw an outpouring of positive change in the real world. In homes across the country, people whispered John's words to one another. Kindness doesn't have to be grand. It just has to be real. And as those words took root, they grew into conversations, into plans, into actions that reached far beyond any studio audience. Proof that sometimes the most powerful response is one born of compassion, humility, and simple, steadfast faith. The morning after the show, the studio felt different. Coffee machines gurgled in the break room, and crew members exchanged excited whispers instead of their usual chatter. Clips of John's heartfelt response were already all over the internet. Social media feeds buzzed with videos of his stories, screenshots of his words, and personal pledges to reach out to someone in need. Viewers who had never watched Ellen Dawson's program tuned in online, sharing the segment with friends and family. It wasn't just a trending moment. It was a movement, and people were talking about it in homes, classrooms, and offices across the country. Ellen arrived early at the studio, her heels clicking on the polished floor. She stepped off the elevator and paused, taking in the familiar hallway lined with posters. But today the posters seemed to glow with a new light, as though they, too, were shining with the idea of kindness. She walked past her dressing room and into the main control area. Producers and technicians looked up, smiles spreading on their faces. Ellen felt a warm rush in her chest, pride mixed with humility. Pride that her show had sparked something real, and humility that the power of her platform came with a responsibility she could no longer ignore. Before the first live segment, Ellen asked to speak with John. He was already there, quietly reviewing, notes on a small table near the makeup chairs. She found him surrounded by volunteers from his charity, passing out leaflets about upcoming events. His face brightened when he saw her approach. Ellen took a deep breath, stepped forward, and offered her hand. "John," she said softly. "Thank you." He looked at her, surprised by the simplicity of her gratitude. She continued, "I want to apologize for how I started our conversation. I didn't appreciate what you had to say until I really listened." "I'm sorry." John's calm eyes met hers. He accepted her apology with a warm smile and then said, "Thank you for hearing me." They shared a gentle handshake, a moment of genuine connection that spoke louder than any words. Back on set, Ellen opened the show by addressing the viral clip. She spoke sincerely to the camera. "Yesterday, Pastor John Kennedy reminded us that kindness can be simple, and that small actions done by many can become something big. I'm proud we had the chance to share his message." The audience applauded, and Ellen gestured toward John, inviting him back for one final word. He walked onto the stage and took Ellen's hand, holding it briefly before turning to speak to the viewers. John talked about the flood of messages his charity had received overnight, volunteers offering time, local businesses pledging donations, and families organizing neighborhood events. He shared a few stories of a high school student starting a weekend reading club, of office workers collecting lunch leftovers for a shelter, and of a retiree walking across town to check on an elderly neighbor. As he spoke, his voice carried a gentle excitement. The audience watched, moved by the chain reaction his appearance had triggered. When John finished, Ellen joined him at center stage. She picked up a stack of the blank cards he had received earlier and handed them to audience members. "Let's write notes," she suggested. "Take a moment right now to write a few lines to someone you know who might need a kind word." The cameras showed people in the front rows pausing to write, some smiling, some looking thoughtful, some even tearing up. The gesture was small, but the impact was visible. Ellen turned back to John and said, "This is just the beginning. What's next?" John's eyes lit up. He spoke of a National Kindness Week, inviting any talk show, news station, or community group to host similar note-writing events. He encouraged viewers at home to film their own clips, to share stories of compassion, and to keep the conversation going. In the days that followed, local news outlets picked up the story. Schools organized kindness clubs, where students wrote letters to seniors or packed care packages for families in need. Corporations rethought their corporate responsibility efforts, adding volunteer days inspired by John's simple call to action. Neighborhood associations scheduled block parties centered on potluck dinners and shared stories of gratitude. Even city councils declared a day of compassion, asking residents to perform at least one act of kindness. The phrase kindness chain became common on social media, often accompanied by the hashtag #TarnKindnessChain and a snapshot of someone's note or act of service. Within a week, John's charity reported a remarkable rise in volunteers and donations. His small team, which had once struggled to cover basic needs, now had the resources to expand projects into nearby towns. They scheduled extra food drives, set up reading corners in libraries, and partnered with medical professionals for free clinics. John found himself traveling more, giving talks at schools and community centers. But despite the growing demands on his time, he remained rooted in simplicity. Every speech, every meeting ended with a call for one small act of kindness. Ellen, too, felt the shift. Her show's format evolved. While she still welcomed celebrities and shared light-hearted segments, she added a regular feature called Heart of the Week. In this segment, she highlighted a story of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, from a teenager planting trees to a group of neighbors who rebuilt a playground. The change brought new energy and purpose to her program. Ratings remained strong, but more importantly, the tone of the show grew kinder, more genuine. Ellen learned to balance humor with heart, understanding that laughter could open doors, but compassion held them open. A month after the original taping, Ellen invited John back for a special reunion episode. The studio had transformed. Behind them stood a giant mural painted by volunteers filled with colorful words of hope and names of small towns that had joined the movement. The audience was made up not of hired extras, but of people who had been touched by the kindness chain, families who had received help, volunteers who had given their time, children who had found new purpose. As Ellen and John took their seats, the applause was thunderous, but it felt like celebration rather than spectacle. Ellen began by saying, "Today, we are celebrating what happens when one voice is heard, when one person speaks from the heart, and others choose to listen." John nodded, adding, "And what happens when those listeners become doers?" They shared a conversation that was both reflective and forward-looking. Ellen asked John about the challenges of sustaining momentum, and he spoke honestly about volunteer fatigue and the need for rest and self-care. He explained how acts of kindness had to be balanced with personal well-being, and how community meant looking after both the giver and the receiver. Together, they unveiled a new partnership between Ellen's show and John's charity. Each month they would spotlight a community project and offer matching donations, encouraging viewers to contribute and then doubling their impact. The partnership was announced with genuine excitement. It wasn't a product placement or a publicity stunt, but a shared commitment to keep kindness alive. Ellen turned to John with a bright smile and said, "Let's see how big this kindness chain can grow." John laughed softly, replying, "Let's make sure it reaches every corner." After the reunion show wrapped, Ellen and John walked backstage, together. The hallway was quieter now, the buzz of production fading behind closed doors. They paused near the exit where a small group of volunteers sat at a folding table, ready to send care packages overseas. Ellen watched them work, labeling boxes, sealing envelopes, packing items with care. She turned to John and said, "I never imagined my job could feel like this, like I'm part of something greater than the ratings." John placed a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for using your voice," he said. "Thank you for listening." Ellen smiled, her eyes reflecting the laughter and tears of the past weeks. She promised herself to carry this spirit forward, both on and off camera. John, meanwhile, felt invigorated by the partnership and by the sheer creativity of so many people eager to help. He thought of the next generation, the children who saw kindness on television and believed it was something they too could do. In the months that followed, the kindness chain continued to weave through communities. New projects sprang up: art workshops for seniors, after-school STEM programs for underprivileged youth, neighborhood cleanups turned into block parties. The phrase, "pay it forward," became more than a saying. It became a series of actions that filled social media feeds with images of hope, pictures of handwritten notes, of shared meals, of volunteers teaching and listening. Ellen and John stayed in touch beyond the camera's eye. They met for coffee, to brainstorm new ideas. They visited a shelter together to serve meals. And they even took part in a neighborhood gardening day, digging in to plant flowers along a school fence. Their friendship, born of a moment on live television, grew into a partnership rooted in mutual respect and a shared belief that every small act of kindness mattered. By the end of the year, what began as a single unscripted answer on a talk show had blossomed into a national movement. The kindness chain had reached thousands of communities, and every link, every act was a reminder that simple gestures, notes, meals, listening ears, could transform lives. Ellen's show had changed for the better, and John's charity had grown beyond his wildest dreams. But most importantly, people everywhere discovered that they had the power to make a difference, one kind act at a time. And in that discovery lay the true legacy of Amy,